the field as big as possible and puts it into a really dangerous...
Hello, my name is Ini Umotong and I'm a football player for Lewes FC.
Umotong scores her first goal for the club!
This year marks the 100th anniversary of the FA banning women's football in 1921. As a player, as like all female players, I'm still feeling the consequences today. But I wanted to know more about why this ban happened in the first place. So I caught up with club director Charlie Dobres to get his take on the politics and the history involved.
I personally love International Women's Day. It's a great opportunity to celebrate how far women have come through history, especially in women's football. When you have a look at the ban in 1921, I just look at where women's football is today and I just get really excited to how far it's come and how far it still has to go, and just the growth, and it's great to be a part of it.
I mean, International Women's Day is something to look forward to. It's interesting. I think maybe as a football fan and as a man as well, I approach it and the 1921 FA ban in another way. Mm-hmm. And strangely, the more I've heard about it, the more I've read about it, I get angry. I get angrier and I feel more ashamed as a way as well, because of the role of, particularly of men, played in the 1921 FA ban, and something we can hopefully talk about, and how some ways things have got better, in other ways they haven't.
Obviously I know that women's football was pulling in record attendances, and the kind of theory is that the men's side was jealous and the FA kind of banned that, but there's many reasons and theories why the FA put that ban in place, but bottom line is that women's football was in demand and still is in demand, and people have this perception that women's football is a minority sport. Well, that's not the case, neither in 1921 nor today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's for a start, many people don't know about the 1921 ban by the then FA, and I think it's important to know that. And it lasted for, 50 years, till 1971. And then the FA themselves didn't launch anything official till about 20 years later, so it was almost a 70-year ban. But it's exactly as you say. I mean, about the famous, for those people who know about it, the Boxing Day crowd in 1920 that Dick Kerr Ladies versus St Helens, I think it was, 50,000 people, 50,000 people at Goodison Park and 14,000 people locked out. And that's a big number, but even now people might sort of go, yeah, but it's even that's not as many as Man United get now. But at that time, that was like a super big number. So in the 21-22 season, fun enough, Liverpool won the league that year. Probably won't this year, but Liverpool won the league in 21-22, the season in which the ban happened, and their average gate for the whole season was 38,000. So even Liverpool at that point weren't achieving it. And on the same day, in 1920, as well, as a Boxing Day match then, where I think it was Sheffield United away to Burnley, and Burnley were top team, and that got 50,000 as well. But it's a matter of, this was a really big crowd then, as well as being a big crowd now. So I think one myth we can bust, isn't it, is that women's football, it's never going to be popular, because it was popular, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and it still is popular. If you look at the last Women's World Cup in 2019, there was 1.1 billion viewers worldwide. I mean, the demand
no one's interested
exactly.
in women's football.
I know. So when you look at the stats, it's like, where are people forming these opinions? And they must just be uninformed or misinformed. I don't know which one it is.
It's a bit of both, and I do kind of think, again, which is why as a guy I suppose I get angry about it and a bit ashamed, because I think that it's up to people to inform themselves and believe, because sometimes when they hear this stuff, guys in particular don't really believe it, but it's absolutely true. And I think, sometimes I think of that scene in, do you know Good Will Hunting, the film? Have you ever seen it?
Yes, I love that movie.
There's a totally brilliant scene in it where Robin Williams puts his arms around the young guy and keeps saying, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. Until he breaks down. And I almost want to start off by saying, like, to all the guys watching this, it's not your fault. Seriously, the 1921 ban, it's not your fault. The FA, it's not your fault. But the question then is, but find out more about it, find out about, what's happened to women's football, what it's missed out on, and then do something about it. Or as a minimum, don't get in the way. Because, you must get fed up with, like, online comments like we all do about...
absolutely. And the amount of times I've had to inform and educate people online when they have just plain incorrect facts. It's
Incorrect facts.
Yes, it's
lies. Sometimes.
Lies. Absolutely, and those lies spread like wildfire, and that's where the misconception about women's football comes from. So I've lost count how many times I've had to kind of correct people on Twitter and Instagram, but if you look at obviously the 50-year ban, more than 50-year ban on women's football, I'm actually really impressed with how far we've come. We've had a massive halt in our progress, compared to the men's game, and yet we're still attracting fans. England versus Germany in 2019, almost 78,000 people in the audience.
No one's interested.
Exactly, and considering we had a 50-year kind of...
Yeah.
Men's team had a 50-year head start. Now, others were doing well to catch up, I think.
And I think that's part of it, is that people sort of say, well, when women get the same crowds as men, you can pay them same, or when they sort of get more coverage in the sports media. But as you say, it's like there's been this like 70-year gap. And in that time, women have never had the 1966 moment, or the moment in the 80s, when English clubs dominated European football, or the Matthews Cup final of 1953. These things have been stolen.
Exactly.
Stolen
Absolutely.
from women, all these cultural and iconic moments. So I suppose it's, in that sense, no wonder that people, guys often, don't know. But I think they also put unreasonable expectations about all of a sudden, women need to do this in order to earn it. And sometimes I think about like a reparations argument, really. I mean, of course people should invest, of course sponsors should invest, but also I think, I'm not saying money should be paid as such, but something was stolen from women at that time, wasn't it?
Absolutely. And I think even for the past maybe like 20 years, whereby the money going into football was more just the corporate social responsibility as a tick box. With the growth and the rate at which the women's game is growing, it's the fastest growing sport in England at the moment. Women's football is becoming its own entity, its own standalone umbrella, and I think it's fabulous, because I think more and more people, it will attract more and more sponsors, and which will just help the game to boom even more. And like you said about when people say, "Oh, we don't deserve equal pay," and if you look at a case like the case study of the United States and the women's team, that national team, for the past 5 years they have brought in more revenue than the men's side, and yet they're not equal pay. So I like to say, what is your argument?
You still can't have equal pay
exactly.
then.
So what is your argument there?
Yeah. Well, then you've got to get back in your box.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, exactly. So in your argument, should the women's team then be paid higher than the men's team, according to your argument?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like I say, it's just people who are uninformed having these opinions.
This is it, and I kind of thought one of the things I wanted to sort of have a chat about today as well, and kind of put on record is what it was like. None of us were alive then, it wasn't our fault, but what it was, the situation in 1921, because the women's ban didn't just come from nowhere. I mean, people often sort of say, well, women's football was too popular, so that's why they banned it, but that's only kind of part of it. So the other things I think which are worth kind of saying is that we've mentioned about how they were getting big crowds, but that was a problem to the FA at the time, because they were expanding the leagues. So I think in the season before, there were 2.5 seasons of men's leagues coming back after the First World War, when they then decided to ban women's football on the 5th of December 1921. And in the season before the ban, the FA had introduced a third division, and the season of the ban, the FA had introduced a third division North. So they'd gone from 2 to 4 leagues. And of course, you need to create the demand for that. So I think you get a situation whereby you've got this really annoying thing like women's football, which was only supposed to be this pastime during the First World War, becoming and staying really popular. So I think from an economic point of view, the FA would have thought, which of course are all men, is going to take away all this revenue that we need to generate for the men's football.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the second part of the ban, for those who know about it, there's a famous part of it where, I can't remember the exact wording, but the FA talked about it being an unsuitable game for women. They had a doctor in to say they were worried. I'm laughing. They were worried about it affecting the reproductive organs of women. But the other reason they said was that women were often, the majority of the money taken at gate was given to charitable causes during the First World War, but after it. And if you work out, I was trying to work it out, if you work out just the Dick Kerr ladies, who were like the biggest team at the time, and I think they played, just in 1921, 67 matches for charity, and the figures available just for about a third of them show that in those they raised in modern money £1.5 million, just in a third of those games, that was largely given to charity. So the FA, these guys got in a room and sort of said, well, we don't like that because we think you're basically skimming. We think you're not giving as much money to charity as you should be, which was weird because the men's game wasn't giving any money to charity, really. But I think, again, they saw money being raised that could belong to the FA, and they were casting completely unsubstantiated aspersions on the people running the game. So it was like, a pincer movement from the FA.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's fascinating that even then, the FA thought that the women weren't given enough to charity. But you look at elite teams today and how much of their revenue is going to charity. Is there a problem now? Does the FA think there's a problem now?
I think all these things, again, if you go back to that time, there was, it's interesting because the First World War represented an enormous change for British society and for women. Women were all of a sudden brought into the factories to work as munitionettes. And I think by the end of 1918, there's something like 1 million women. Like 1 million women were working as munitionettes. And a fair number lost their lives as well because these were dangerous places to work. But they were needed at that point by the patriarchy, by society, to work in factories, so the men could be released to go to the front. But interestingly, not a lot of people know this, as they say, but when they were brought in, there was an explicit agreement that they would, after the war, be taken out as well of all these different positions, because what the government wanted to re-establish under Lloyd George was, in a sense, a Britain like before the First World War. So they fought for this thing. They didn't fight for this British society to change. They fought for British society. So all the women that came into the munitions factories were then phased out, and all the engineering jobs that they did. So that I think it's by 1924, this deliberate program of taking women back out of industrial jobs was almost complete. So this ban in 1921 sits right there as well, in a sense of women were put into these positions filled by men so they could go to war, but they were then taken out of the positions. And they were therefore, this picture of the ban is also an example, I think, across industry, across the economy in the country, of women being taken out of those positions. So thanks very much, make bombs, entertain us, raise some money, the guys are back, now come out of the way, so we can have society looking much more like we fought for.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we can just be so thankful that the role of women in society today compared to the role of women in society in 1920 is changing, and it's exciting time. It's exciting times. I look at when I was growing up playing football, and just the influence that the ban had on myself as a young girl playing football. I was the only girl out of all my friends to play football.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. There was probably about 20 of us in my neighbourhood. Used to, after school, in some holidays, we used to call it World Cup, and we used to make World Cup and make little teams and play against each other. I was always the only girl to play, and you look at them. Why is that? Is that women didn't see professional football as a career. Young boys and girls didn't share the same kind of idea of what their future looked like. Even when I was a child, and it is changing now. You see more girls playing football and having the aspirations to become professional athletes because our society is changing the view of what women could be in society, which I think is incredible. But it just shows the effect that it is still having, because if you look at the disparity between the number of girls playing football today and the number of boys playing football, there is still a massive gap. Yeah,
and we ask, so imagine if there'd never been a ban about how far women's football, where it would be now. It would have had the welcome homes, it would have had all these things, wouldn't it, as well? And I think now, I read the figure that in the most recent full season, according to Deloitte's, is that the total value of all the revenues of the men's clubs in the top 4 leagues, the total value is £6.2 billion of money, not the value of the company's worth more, but the money earned in, still managed to make a loss, by the way, of £500 million. But this is how much money is in the game. So the loss is economic, the loss is cultural, as you say, because, I'm from another generation where if you were a girl in school then, you wouldn't go into the playground and play football. It just wasn't a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's changing social perceptions, and which is a lot more needs to be done to change that perception. But it is going in the right direction.
It is. I still, I can't help harking back to 1921. So at that point, the ban, if you're a woman playing, what does that feel like? There are 150 teams playing in England at that point, and literally overnight they had this meeting on the 5th of December. It doesn't even last that long. I think it's 50 minutes or something. They come out with this statement for the reasons that we're kind of looking at, and suddenly it's not you can play, but you can only play on a rugby pitch in a park. You can't have an FA referee or anything like that. And I also look at kind of the sort of person that could do it. And interestingly, to me, the president of the FA at that point was this guy called Arthur Kinnaird. Lord Kinnaird, he's a 74-year-old guy. And I don't know if you ever watched the Netflix series The English Game. It was I recommend it. Well, it was good, and it depicts this guy Arthur Kinnaird as a young man. It's about the birth of the men's football game in this country, and it depicts him as a real, ultimately social hero about pushing through the game. And I kind of get this sort of kind of disparity between depiction of this person and this other person who I suppose at that point is just a product of his society and patriarchy, who presides over a meeting that takes football away from thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of women and girls, just like that. So you always kind of look behind these things and think, look, what's going on in society at that point? And to really understand that women's football then was very political, small p political, and I think it still is. I think still at the moment, for a woman to play football is seen as like a statement, isn't it?
Yeah,
rather
absolutely.
than just a thing.
Absolutely. And if you look at your counterpart, male and female, it's much more of an accomplishment if a female is doing it than if a male is doing it. Well, why is that? Why is there completely different perceptions on this? This is because football is football. It's the same job. So why is there so much more of a different stigma attached to when a woman plays than when a man plays?
It's just, I mean, we come down to society, isn't it, and what it was like then, and we hope it's kind of changed now. But then, of course, we almost have to, we're not in it. It was an incredibly male-dominated society. I think it would have driven us mad, I hope, or maybe we would have been conditioned, I don't know, but incredibly male-dominated. And you have a Prime Minister at the time of the ban, David Lloyd George, who was, I think history judges is sometimes quite an enlightened Prime Minister, and yet was someone, as Prime Minister during the time of the ban, during a time when women were then, after the First World War, put back into being roles as mothers and daughters and sisters, because that was kind of the right thing for them. And he's an interesting character as well, I think, because before he became Prime Minister in 1916, he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. And in 1913, in that role, his house, I shouldn't laugh, but his house, it was being built, he wouldn't live there, but his house is being built in Liverpool, was actually firebombed by the suffragettes. So Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughter Christabel and a few others gathered in this, it was an empty house, you know, it was empty, but it was his house, and kind of bombed it, basically, and it was somewhat destroyed because they felt his pace of change as Chancellor of Exchequer wasn't fast enough. And I also wonder about that, about on a human level, that is, you know, here's this thing, these uppity women have kind of bombed his house because he kind of won't move fast enough. And then in the time when he's Prime Minister, because, you know, we have to be certain that things like the FA and the government, these different men's clubs, were very interconnected at the time, so that one association's agenda was another association's agenda. And I think as well, it's that when we look now in 2021, I think we can kind of, we hope for change and we try and drive change. And I do kind of hope that by people informing themselves more and more, that they can sort of play their part. And I sort of think that, you know, I think as a man, as a male football fan, very poor footballer, by the way, but as a fan, lifelong fan, you know, my eyes have been opened just in the last, I don't know really, I suppose just in the last 5 years or so in particular. I mean, I became a director here when we did the community takeover in 2010, and there was a women's team here since 2002. But I kind of didn't automatically go, wow, this is a gem, let's do something. That arrived and it happened, and we were so fortunate for that team to already be here. And then I think, you know, as a man and as a director, it just gradually dawned on me more and more and more. And then it wasn't until 2016 in the planning when another director, Ed, sort of said, look, you know, me and him were both going to re-stand for election, because you stand every 3 years in this board. And he said, I think we should do this. And the this was basically Equality FC. And I said, I think that's absolutely spot on. So we both stood on that platform, got elected, and then I think from that point that's when the club itself woke up. So and we probably could and should have done it sooner as well. So I guess our message is also anybody can do it.
Absolutely, and it's just the education. Educating yourself before forming an opinion. Have an educated opinion. That's all. That's really all we're asking. Before you see something like when I first saw the equality kind of stance Lewes took, and he had an equal paying budget for its men's and women's teams. I saw so many trolls and so many comments that that's not possible, that's not feasible, that's not sustainable. Well, actually, why not? Like, why?
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 But why? But why? And it's funny actually, because one of the things we said at the time was, just by the act of doing it, no one could say it couldn't be done.
Exactly.
Because it can be done.
And it's exciting, Lewes being the pioneers of this, because it just takes one person or one organisation to break the mould and to break the stigma, and Lewes, we've proved that it can be done. So it's an exciting time, because I won't be surprised if many other teams and clubs follow suit in the near future.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I mean, I've really enjoyed talking to you, and we could talk for ages, except it's getting a bit cold, isn't it? If I'm honest, as well. It might look really sunny, but it's actually a little bit cold. And now you've got to get to training as well, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
As well. But thanks so much. And in this International Women's Day of Choose to Challenge, I guess our message is let's challenge.
Yes, absolutely.